Hi everyone, my name is Erin Long and I am the Administration on Community Living's lead for our Alzheimer's and Dementia programs. I just want to congratulate everyone on your recent awards. We're super excited. We have a great group and a broad range of folks that are participating in our program this year. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of our programs and touch on some topics related to grants management, and then I'm going to turn you over to the folks from our National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center who will be serving through the program. You'll have an assigned technical liaison for this, and they're going to complement the skills of our project officers. We have 3 project officers that work on our Alzheimer's program. It's myself, Vijeth Iyengar, and Jesse Moore. It's not, I'm sorry, it should be, there we go. Sorry about that. So we are super excited, and with that, I'm just going to, just sort of give you an outline of who's going to be involved in all of the communications through our grants. You'll have your program director and your finance officer. ACL will have the project officer, which will be one of the 3 of us, and as well as you'll have your grants management specialist, who is Ms. Sherlonda Blue. She couldn't be with us today, but I'm going to cover some of the stuff for her. When you have issues related to the payment management system or our grant solution system, Sherlonda can often help, but she helps with all of the financial pieces of our projects. And then we have the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, the NADRC. Each grant will have a technical assistance liaison assigned to your project, and then there will also be a backup staff person that will be there to support you when your primary is not available. Just a reminder that these are cooperative agreements, and basically I just wanted to sort of give you what a cooperative agreement means, and basically it provides for substantial involvement and collaboration of AOA ACL in activities that your organization will carry out in accordance with the provisions of the approved grant award. Basically, that means that we are going to work hand in hand to get your project moving and get it so that it's what you need and what we need, and we'll both agree on where you go. I'm just going to give you a little bit of information on our grants management, some grant management topics. You will note that your notice of award that you received shows 2 key roles. The authorized organizational representative, that's the person that signed your application, and basically that's the person that can obligate your organization to do things, assuming, so they assume the obligation to follow the laws, they ensure compliance, and this is the person that really has oversight of the grantee project director. The other key role in the program, in your grant program, will be the principal investigator or the project program director, and that's the person that's responsible for the day-to-day management of the program, oversight of the reporting and the financial reporting. It may not be the person that's actually doing that work, but that's the person that's responsible for those sorts of activities, and that's typically the person that your project officer is going to come to when they have questions or concerns. Both of these roles are key roles in your project. So, for instance, if your AOR is what the authorized organizational representative, or your PIPD were to change, you have to request an amendment. I'm going to do a little bit. I'll give you a little bit more information on the amendment in a minute. But so you should have all received your notice of award. That's something that's system generated by our system, our awards management system, which is called Grant Solutions. The notice of award is what establishes your relationship with ACL, and it includes the guidelines of your terms and conditions of your grant are included in that, as well as like the dollar amounts and the federal commitment and the match commitment. So all of your basic information, it provides guidance on how to access your funds in your account, and then basically the notice of award is what makes the funds available, shows that you have those funds available to you. So these are the first steps of once you receive a new award. You've probably done most of it, or have you hopefully reviewed your notice of award. It goes into your reporting requirements, some of the key conditions, you know, the match and the direct service and the reporting schedules, those sorts of things. And it reviews the business policies and practices. There's certain things that are required, that we are required. It also includes the financial transaction roles, and that's about setting up your account with the payment management system and the scheduling, as I said, the scheduling of reports. Basically for the payments, I know a lot of people are always real interested in how do we get the money. So the first payment that you access, that basically accounts for you accepting the grant. I was asked to make sure to let you know that advance payment is acceptable. However, when you do request an advance payment for something, for an activity, you do have to disperse the funds within 3 days of receiving them. So, you know, make sure that you have to be real careful in your timing of claiming resources and then making sure that your payments go out. If there's a non-payment, it would be explained through our PMS system. So amendments, I mentioned that briefly before. On your notice of award, as I was saying, there is the AOR and the PIPD. If by chance you need to change who your principals are, that is not something that can just be done with an email or a call. You have to actually request an amendment through our grant solution system. And the formal submission would include, like, if you're replacing an individual in a key role, you would have to include a CV, a letter making the request, including the reason for the request, and it has to be signed by the existing head of the agency or the AOR as the person who is designated. And then basically it goes through our system. We have to, while the program officer reviews it and makes a recommendation, it does go all the way up to our grants management, chief grants management officer for final approval. So, you know, making sure that the appropriate individuals are in those roles is key, and it has to be backed up with some documentation. I mentioned Grant Solutions. I suspect that you all are familiar with it at this point. That is the one and only way that we manage our grant programs here. All of your reports are uploaded into it. Communications between some communications between the program officer and the grantee are conducted through there. For instance, when you're being approved, we're going to go a little bit later into the planning and implementation phases. When you're transitioning from one to the other, there has to be a record of that in our grant solution system. Those referenced in your application should have already been assigned grant solution accounts. If you have someone that you want to, say, have an administrative personnel to be the person that's uploading your documents, you need to do a request for an administrative user, and there's a link here that provides the directions for making that request for another user account in Grant Solutions. They do have a help desk if you have problems getting to those, getting that individual assigned an account. Just please use the information on this slide to contact Grant Solutions, and they're usually pretty good about getting you where you need to be. Obviously, if you have trouble with any of that, you can always go back to your program officer or the technical assistance liaison, and while this isn't our area of expertise, we will certainly do what we can to help you get to where you need to be. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Kate Gordon to talk about the specifics of your projects.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kate Gordon, and I am one of the technical assistance liaisons that you will meet through the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center. We team with the staff at the Administration for Community Living to help you to get launched with your grants and stay in compliance with the requirements in both your notice of award and stay true to the assigned funding opportunities that you guys have put in applications and been assigned for. So once you receive your notice of award and following through the requirements in the funding opportunity notice, you are now in the project planning phase. The project planning phase is when you work with ACL, the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, and our colleagues to develop a revised work plan. So everybody's application included a work plan, and you lined out what activities and programs that you would like to do, but during the project planning phase, we work together to make sure that the activities that you've outlined meet the requirements of ACL. So based on that work plan that you created for your original application, we, meaning the team of ACL, the National Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center, and you yourselves with your partners will work together to tweak those goals and objectives to create something that we all agree upon to move forward with. Included in that is not just a revised work plan, but the development of a more detailed evaluation plan based on any revisions that you've done to your revised work plan. So this is what Erin was talking about when we look at the substantial involvement of ACL in the development and the implementation of your grant opportunity. We all work together. So be prepared during this planning phase to work together with ACL to revise, and re-revise. We're talking multiple revisions will probably be needed for your work plan as well as for your evaluation plan. At a minimum, the planning phase typically takes 3 to 4 months. However, some of our grantees have extended into over a year in their project planning period. Oftentimes that has to do with changes in staff at the programmatic level, but just to give you the heads up, it's at least 3 to 4 months of which you are limited and the access to your federal funds. During this planning phase, a grantee can only access up to 15% of their funds. So until you have reached the end of your project planning phase, you can only access that 15%. At the conclusion of your planning phase, when we've all agreed on work plans and evaluation plan, you have a very formal planning phase exit conference where you'll receive verbal approval from AOA ACL to progress into the implementation phase, and that's where you can access the remaining 85% of your funds in that cooperative agreement. So in the implementation phase, that's when you're actually going to be doing the direct services, helping those families and persons with dementia, training people in your community. So that's the work towards your program goals and objectives, your anticipated outcomes, and we don't leave your side through the life of your grant. You'll still receive access to technical assistance. For example, webinars like you're participating on today. We have monthly webinars that we'll hear a little bit more about later from my project partner, Sari Schumann. So to help you along the way in this project planning period, we do have resources from those who've blazed the trail in front of you. There are available on the NADRC webpage, which is the link that you see in front of you, access to webinars that talk about best practices in work plan development, best practices in evaluation planning. There are templates in both Excel format and Word format that you can use to redo your work plan as needed. There are tips and, as I said, ideas that from others who've been generated in the past. Just like the work plan templates, there are also evaluation plan templates available in Excel and Word. and samples of what ACL identifies as some best cases for your evaluation plan. We do request that anytime you are working on your work plan or your evaluation plan that you use either Excel or Word to submit those plans. Why? Because it's a document that we're going to use together and we want to be able to revise together. If you submit it in PDF format, the majority of us don't have access to a PDF writer, so we please use Excel or Word. Erin mentioned that in your notice of award, there's an outline of reporting requirements. The reporting requirements for this grant include both programmatic reporting and financial reporting. A calendar of the due dates for these different types of reports will be sent to you after our orientation meeting today. So let me first talk about the programmatic reporting. Number one, the semi-annual and final reports. These are where you're going to be talking about the direct services that have been provided through your grant. You're going to report and describe in narrative form what you've done using both the federal dollars and the match that you bring to the table. The semi-annual reports that are listed, those are program progress reports due semi-annually. They're due within 30 days following each 6-month period. So your first reporting period started the day of your start of your notice of award. So the day that your program started is the date listed on your program, on your notice of award. And 6 months after that is the end of your first progress report period. So 6 months and 30 days later, you should send a report, a narrative report, and we'll talk about a demographic data report through the grant solution system as a note. And every 6 months following that, you'll also submit a program progress report. The program progress report is a very formal report. There are 4 questions that are asked of you as grantees in reporting what's been happening during your grant. Those 4 questions are around the following: achievements and accomplishments. What have you or your partners done in utilizing the dollars through your grant program? Number 2, what challenges have you faced during this reporting period? Number 3, any outcomes. So that evaluation plan comes into play semi-annually. You're going to be reporting on your evaluation measures semi-annually. And number 4, any products that you've created through your program. So whether that's webinars, slide presentations, trainings, etc., those are also going to be submitted through your semi-annual reports. You can see that there's a bullet point here that says narrative report. This is the semi-annual report I'm talking about. The program progress report, the link there is directly to the instructions that say answer the 4 questions that I just outlined. As Erin mentioned, we also have fiscal financial reporting that's due annually for these grants. Grants are required to submit an annual financial status report, also known as the SF-425. Those are due 30 days following each 12-month reporting period. So 1 year from now, you will be developing and submitting your SF-425 through the Grant Solutions system. That report is where you reconcile your cash accounts with any expenditures for that 1-year reporting period. You submit a cumulative report each year. At the very end, for both this narrative report that I talked about and the SF-425, a final report, the narrative, data that's due as part of that narrative format, and this financial report are due one more time in a final report that's cumulative of all of the activities and expenditures that you've made through the life of your grant. This SF-425 that I'm talking about has a very formal reporting mechanism as well, and you have to use the format that's available and listed in your notice of award. You have to complete every line as appropriate and applicable to your grant. If you have any questions about the reporting for the SF-425, you're going to talk to Ms. Sherlonda Blue, as Erin outlined earlier. We're going to be talking about the demographic data that's due as part of the semi-annual direct services report, and also the details of what is the dementia capability assessment, which is another requirement outlined in the funding opportunity. So I want to move over to our OMB data reporting form. And I'm going to pass the baton over to the data guru for the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, Ms. Stephanie Hughes.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephanie Hughes. I do work with the Resource Center. I'll be probably partnering with some of you on your projects to work on your planning phase soon. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit this afternoon about the details of this OMB data reporting form, which is one of the pieces of the semi-annual report that you will be submitting. So we'll take a little bit of time to look at these requirements and how you fill out this spreadsheet. So on this first slide, you can see what this spreadsheet looks like. At the bottom, you can see that there are 3 tabs. One is for data on persons with dementia and caregivers. The second is for professionals that you've trained, and the third is for services and expenditures. And Cameron, if you can help me get that pointer again, for some reason that is not showing up here. So first we will take a look at the spreadsheet on the persons with dementia and caregivers that are served. So this slide just shows you what demographic data you're required to collect on the persons with dementia and caregivers that you're serving through the direct services in your project. So this is, on this slide you can see the first part of this first worksheet. So the first 3 categories here are age, gender, and geographic location. So here's where you're going to enter the number of persons with dementia that you've served and the number of caregivers that you've served in each of these categories. And can we get the pointer here, Cameron? I'm clicking on the button, but it's not showing up. Thank you so much. So now we'll see if I can get it to move where I want it. So once you enter the data on your persons with dementia and the number of caregivers that you've served, this column at the right, the totals column, is automatically going to add those 2 numbers. So you don't need to enter anything into that column. However, you'll see that there is this total served row at the top, and you do need to be sure to enter there the total number of people with dementia and the total number of caregivers that you've served through your project. Please note that all of this data that you're submitting through this spreadsheet should be cumulative. So you'd be starting from the first date of your project in September of this year, and then going all the way up until the last date of the reporting period that you're reporting on. If you have any questions about how to define these categories, so for example, sometimes people ask about how do we define urban versus rural. We don't really have time to get into that level of detail on today's call, but I want you to be aware that there is a document called Terms and FAQs. You'll be receiving that as part of an email in the next few days. That email will provide you with links to various reporting resources. And I really encourage you to look through that document, because not only does it give definitions, but it goes through a lot of different possible questions that you may have about reporting and looks at those different scenarios. You can also contact your Resource Center staff person or your ACL program officer if you have questions about any of these reporting requirements. And if you have not heard from your Resource Center staff person yet, you will be hearing from us soon in terms of setting up an initial meeting. Okay, so we'll move on to the next few categories of data that are the demographic data that's required. So these next categories are ethnicity, race, and minority status. And I just want to mention a couple of things about these data categories that are a little bit different. First of all, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, has changed how they want programs to be reporting on race data. In the past, people had to choose just one category, but now you need to allow your program participants to check all of the racial categories that apply to them. So this is the only demographic data category that's like this, where people can choose more than one option. but you do need to give them that option to choose more than one. And then you may also need to work with your IT staff or the people who are helping you set up your database to make sure that your system is going to accommodate that type of tracking. Okay, so next we'll look at minority status, which is also a little bit different in that this is the only data category that your program staff will need to fill out for each program participant. So you're not going to ask your program participants to indicate whether or not they're a minority. This is something that you need to determine, and it's based on how they have responded to the ethnicity and race categories. So if somebody checks that within ethnicity that they are not Hispanic or Latino, and they check that they're white, and only check that they're white for race, then they're considered not a minority. If the person indicates that they are Hispanic or Latino, or they check any of these other first four categories under race, then they are considered minority. And this is true even if they check white and another one of these race categories, they would still be considered minority. So again, all of these definitions are in that terms and FAQs document, or you can ask your Resource Center staff person if you have questions, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through the basics of that. Another important thing to note here about the minority status data is that you are not going to be able to tabulate this simply based on how the rest of this spreadsheet is filled out. So you can't just enter all of your numbers in this spreadsheet for race and ethnicity and then get a count of minority status. You won't be able to get an accurate number that way. You'll actually need to make that determination for each participant, and then you can add up the minority status numbers from there. So we'll just look at an example here of what this looks like for an individual program participant, realizing, so this is just for illustration. Normally when we're filling out this spreadsheet, you're going to have much larger numbers here of the people that you've served, but I just want to show you what this data looks like at the individual level. So in this case, if we're looking at one person with dementia who's not Hispanic or Latino, but who does check more than one racial category, we see that we've got a 1 in both of those lines. Even though it's one person, the race numbers add up to more than 1, and that is the way that you should fill it out. When we look at this at the aggregate level, you can see there were 100 in this example. Let's say you served 100 people with dementia. The ethnicity numbers add up to 100, and the minority status numbers add up to 100. But in this case, because there was a program participant who checked more than one category for race, those numbers add up to more than 100, and that is, again, correct. You should not see any other demographic categories where the numbers do not add up to the total in your totals row. So that's the only case where you should see numbers that don't match there. Okay, moving on to the last 3 demographic data categories for the persons with dementia and caregivers served. The last 3 are military status, relationship to caregiver, and living arrangement. And you can see here that these last 2 categories are grayed out for caregivers, so you only need to collect this data on relationship and living arrangement for the person with dementia. Okay, so before you submit your data, we ask that you check over your numbers carefully to make sure that they're accurate. Again, when you fill in these numbers in the columns, the totals column is going to tabulate on its own. But you do want to make sure for each of these categories that your columns are adding up to the number at the top. So just in this example here, there were let's say there were 20 people with dementia served. You can see that the numbers for gender add up to 20, the numbers for geographic location add up to 20, the numbers for ethnicity add up to 20, but the numbers for age add up to 25. So in that case, you would know that there's a problem, there's a discrepancy somewhere. You should go back and check those numbers and get them corrected before you submit. We do check these numbers when they're submitted to us, and if there is something that doesn't add up correctly, we're going to come back to you and ask you to check your numbers, to correct them, and to resubmit them. So it just helps save us a lot of time and save you a lot of time if you make sure that the numbers are accurate before you send them in. Okay, so that's all of the data on that first tab for persons with dementia and caregivers served. The next tab within the spreadsheet is where you report on professionals that you've trained. So this includes any kind of formal trainings that you're doing to increase dementia-specific knowledge and skills or change the way any of these professionals are interacting with people with dementia and caregivers. And we're including a wide range of professionals here. So this might be options counselors, it might be direct care workers, it might be first responders or clergy members. Any of these categories you would track, and in this case you're just counting the number of people that you've trained. You don't have to collect any demographic data on those people. One thing to note is that if you're doing trainings in the community, just for community members at large, or for family caregivers or people with dementia, that does not get included on this worksheet. This worksheet is only for professionals or people who are being paid to do this type of work. Again, just like with the first tab, the data that you're reporting should be cumulative, so starting from the beginning of your project. So you should never see that the numbers that you're reporting in one period are lower than the numbers in the previous period. These numbers should be growing each time you submit data, or staying the same, but they shouldn't be going down. Again, definitions for these different categories are in that terms and FAQs document. And you can come to us with questions. If there's any of this information as you begin your reporting that isn't clear, that you're not sure how to count, please just ask us. That's what we're here for. Your program officer, the resource center staff person, we're really glad to help with these kinds of questions. So don't hesitate to reach out. So now I'm going to turn things back over to Kate to talk about the services and expenditures data.
Thanks, Stephanie. So what you've seen in front of you are pieces of what's essentially an Excel document with 3 worksheets on that Excel document. The first one that Stephanie went over, just to remind you, were the basic demographic information that we collect on persons with dementia and their caregivers. The second tab, which Stephanie just outlined, were professionals who've been trained. And the third tab is around services and expenditures. So the direct services that you've provided to persons with dementia, their caregivers, and the professional training that you have done, and expenditures, the percentages of funds that you've spent on direct services. What I'm talking about here in the third tab that we'll look at is not the same as your SF425. What we're talking about on this OMB data set are specific to the funds that you've spent in direct service. Just as a reminder, back to your notice of award and the funding opportunity, grantees are required to provide a minimum of a 25% match. So there's the federal amount of money that you were awarded to this grant, and you also had to bring some match dollars to the table, either cash or in kind. In addition, part of your requirements are to spend not less than 50% of your grant funds on the provision of direct services to persons with Alzheimer's disease related to dementias and their family members. Direct services are defined in that FAQ document that Stephanie was referring to. So you can see what counts as respite and where do your programs and services fit in with direct service. At any point in time, if you have a question during the development of your work plan about whether an activity is counted as direct service or not, that's something that you're going to directly discuss with your ACL staff member and your NADRC liaison. But one really clear thing that you need to know is that when we're talking about the 50% of grant funds that are to be spent on direct services, we're talking about the total approved budget listed in your notice of award. That's the combination of both the federal and non-federal shares of your budget. That's the federal side and your match. 50% of that total amount of money by the end of the grant period has to be spent on the provision of direct services. So tracking of this direct service requirement and the expenditures that go along with it are going to be included in this semi-annual report for the OMB reporting tool. As you see in front of you, just like Stephanie showed you, we've got this lovely green and gray colored document. What we're looking at here is the tracking for the total direct services that you have provided. All right, so what we're looking for, again, defined in that FAQ document is what counts for a unit of direct service. It's typically related to 1 hour of service equals 1 total unit of direct service delivered. So if you were working one-on-one with a caregiver or a person with dementia and helping them to develop a care plan, that 1 hour spent with the caregiver or the person with dementia counts as 1 unit of direct service delivered. The next area that we look at are the percentage of, again, the total funds of your grant spent on direct service expenses. So the staff time, for example, the staff time spent with that caregiver or person with dementia in that care consultation counts towards the expenditures. So your staff time, meaning the salary that they were paid, counts in those direct service expenses. We're also looking at the percentage of funds that are spent on administrative expenses. Again, the difference between direct services and administrative expenses is outlined in the terms and conditions document that Stephanie talked about earlier. Of note, and we see this challenge often, the percentage of funds spent on direct service expenses and the percentage of funds spent on administrative expenses rarely add up to 100%. They rarely add up to 100% because there is time that we're spending on activities outside of direct service or administrative expenses that still are valid for you to spend your grant funds on. So right now, as you're in your project planning period, the time spent in project planning for the first few months is neither direct nor administrative. When you get to the very end of your project and you have your outside evaluator looking at your data, the evaluation and the analysis of the participant outcomes and the report that they're going to be creating is neither direct service nor administrative expense. When you're out in the field and you're disseminating the materials that you've created through your project, that's neither direct nor administrative expense. So just know that it's rarely going to add up to 100%. You'll also see on lines 8 and 9 some very special instructions for other grants that are funded through the Administration for Community Living. The Alzheimer's Disease Supportive Services grants and the Alzheimer's Disease Initiative grants have different requirements in their notice of award, which are lines 8 and 9. This is not applicable for the Alzheimer's Disease Project Initiative that you are funded under. Again, with your grants, not less than 50% of those total grant funds needs to be spent on direct service. If for any reason you need to give some reasons to your project officer why your numbers aren't quite adding up, there is a space for you to add additional narrative information, but we expect to see that also in the narrative document that you send to us in Word form as part of your semi-annual narrative. So some final important notes about this Office of Management and Budget data that all of us are required to report on to the Administration for Community Living on a semi-annual basis is that, as Stephanie mentioned, this is cumulative data, always reported cumulative from the beginning of your grant. It's not specific to the reporting period, and that applies across all of those worksheets. The demographic data for persons with dementia and their caregiver, the professionals trained, and the expenditures numbers that I mentioned. Stephanie and I would just like to emphasize again to check all of your data to make sure that your rows and your columns add up. Any inaccurate or inconsistent data can't be included in the Administration for Community Living reports that actually get reported up to Congress on the impact of this program. Anytime you have inaccuracies or inconsistent data, that means that your National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center staff and our guru, Stephanie, have to come back to you to ask questions. So if you're not the person creating this OMB data reporting form, make sure that you double check someone else's work and they double check your work. And as a final note on this OMB data, always submit this data in Excel format. No PDF files will be accepted. So please make sure that once you're filling it out in Excel form, that you're submitting an Excel form. So we're not yet done with reporting requirements. I'd like to pass the baton over to my colleague, Sari Schumann.
Hello, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the Dementia Capability Assessment requirements for your ADPI grant projects. As you all know, building dementia capability into your current programs in partnership with other key agencies is a key part of this grant process. At the onset of your project and annually thereafter, you will be required to conduct an assessment of the dementia capability of your existing system. You can either use the Dementia Capability Quality Assurance Assessment tool created by the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center. You can see a screenshot of the instructions for that tool right now on your screen. Or you can use another tool that you have approved by the ACL program staff. If you choose to use the Dementia Capability Assessment tool developed by the Resource Center, it will be available to you and your grant partners that are responding to the tool in an online format. You'll work with me and your TA lead to determine which grant program partners will complete the assessment. Generally, those who complete the assessment include you, the grantees, and any project partners that are delivering direct services to people with dementia and their caregivers, or are providing professional training throughout the grant period. After you provide me with the names and email addresses of all of the respondents for your particular grant program, I will then generate individualized links for each person and send them to them in order to complete the assessment tool. This page is showing you just the first 3 questions of the assessment tool if you use the Resource Center tool that we've developed. I do want to highlight that this assessment is brief. It'll only take about 10 minutes to complete. That probably includes getting up and getting a glass of water too. So this tool and the Dementia Capability Assessment requirement will be discussed during your initial calls with your Resource Center Technical Assistance Lead and the ACL Program Officer. And then after that call will be when we start communicating about who should be included and who should be sent to the individualized link to complete the baseline assessment. I'll add that as your partners may change during your grant project, we do allow for that within the assessment. Each year you'll be able to send updated email addresses and names for those who you want to respond to the assessment tool. So we've mentioned kind of in passing that the Resource Center does put together a webinar series. Grantees will participate in the webinar series, which are focused on dementia topics relevant to your grant projects. If you're interested in seeing any of the webinars we've conducted in the past, you can see an archive of all those webinars at the link that you see on your screen now. That is a link within the NADRC website, which I will go over in a moment. So where can you find a lot of the materials that the Resource Center has put together? You can go to nadrc.acl.gov. And at this website, you'll find all the recently added items on the right-hand side. Those are all the documents and webinar recordings, profiles of grant projects that we've put up recently. You'll find general description of what the Resource Center does and how it interacts with ACL in the center there. And then on the top in the blue bar, you'll see the different tabs that you can find other resources. On the And the guides and presentations, this is a popular one because this is where you can find trainings and webinars that we've done in the past. That's where you'll find the archive of all the webinars that I just mentioned. Reporting tools for grantees is also one that you likely will visit to find the data collection reporting tool. And then what you'll find also as you click on the various tabs is there'll be short descriptions and links to the various materials so that you know what you're getting when you are starting to open each document. So while you are awaiting contact from your Resource Center Technical Assistance lead to set up your initial meeting, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact Erin Long and myself. One of us will be able to respond to you and get you the answers you need. Many of you already have been contacted by the Technical Assistance lead staff person, and your meetings are in the process of being scheduled. We'll be having those meetings over the next few weeks, so if you haven't heard anything yet, sit tight and we'll get to you very soon. So that concludes the portion of information that we have to present to you, and we want to open it up for questions at this time. I know that a few people have already put questions in the chat pod of the webinar platform, so I will go ahead and start with those. We had one question that came up when we were talking about the planning phase for the grant projects, and that was from Lisa Morley, who asked, what if we're developing a caregiver screening tool? What phase would that be considered to fit in if they have to be working with contractors? Can it fall into the planning phase, or do they have to wait for implementation? Erin, do you want to respond to that?
So I think making sure that what you plan to do is what you actually end up doing, and that, like, if you plan to create a caregiver screening tool is a great example. There's a lot of screening tools that exist. Whether or not you need to recreate the wheel is the first question that would be addressed in the planning phase, but also that sort of, I think, Lisa, you're from Alaska, sometimes those state contracting processes can take a really long time. So if it turns out that you do, in fact, need to work with a contractor to create a caregiver screening tool, you could start the process of the state's process for engaging the contractor during the planning phase. But obviously, if you get it done, as long as it doesn't exceed that 15% that they expend during your planning phase, that would be fine.
Great, thank you. So we have another question from Stephanie Shivers, who's asking, how do we handle duplicate clients for services? Are we only counting them once? For example, if a person with dementia or a caregiver engages in more than one program activity, do we count them once, or do we count them for each service received?
Everyone is counted once. You would count it once, but you would get credit for the direct services by the hour, but each person engaged is only counted once.
And if you have additional questions about that, you can ask your TA lead. We can go through an example with you looking at the OMB data collection form. It sometimes helps to look at it at the same time when you're discussing different examples. We have another question stating that access to cash is limited to 15% during the planning phase. Is that on the entire grant amount or the amount budgeted for year one only?
It's the entire grant amount. So if your entire grant is 1.3, whatever 15% of that would be, $160,000. So what 10% is 130. So $200,000 if you had like a standard 15%.
Great, thank you. So if you have more questions, please enter them in the chat pod. We have plenty of time to answer some more. We just had one more come in from Al Castro. He's saying that they work primarily with a Latino population. Can we go back and review how Latinos or Hispanics are to be coded in the demographics report? Okay. Yeah, I think we can go back to that. Stephanie, I can try and get back to that slide if you want to talk about that. Cameron, I think we need to move the chat pod over again so I can get back to that slide.
I think we might be able to reach it here at the bottom, but yeah,
okay,
I need to minimize it so that we can see the...
There we go.
I would say that's a good question, and the short answer is that it's really up to respondents how they want to indicate that. There used to be an option for some other race, and that's not on there anymore. These are not categories that we have control over or determine. So if somebody doesn't feel like any of those apply, I suppose they could leave it blank, but that's really for the participants to indicate themselves. Erin, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I'm going to let Kate.
So this is Kate Gordon. I would also add, in terms of what other grantees have done, these are the required collapsed categories for ethnicity. If your grant is looking at subcategories within an ethnic group, so if you wanted to know how many Mexican Americans that you served, or Cubano Americans that you served, or Cuban Americans that you served, you as a grantee can add additional data that you're collecting, but all you're reporting back is the collapsed ethnicity.
And I would just add that these aren't categories that we chose, that they come from the U.S. where they require, the OMB requires us, it's a U.S. Census, I believe, categories.
So it looks like Mr. Castro is providing another comment, but I just want to clarify that you wouldn't add any categories to this OMB form. You are welcome, if you want to give us a more detailed breakdown of those you're serving, you can create a table in a Word format or Excel format and include it in your semi-annual narrative report. Additional information like that is welcome, and it's definitely something that is what we would like to see. If there's something interesting or different that you want to report, just please don't add categories to the actual form.
Yeah, I mean, just to reinforce the don't add categories to the form, this is a form that we have to go through the Office of Management and Budget to approve. We're not allowed to change it in any way. That's sort of why it has stuff in there about other programs that aren't related to you, because it's approved for a certain number of years, and then we can go back and tweak it, but we only are allowed to collect the information that's on the form, and that information only.
Stephanie, there's one more clarification question there that's asking if a person lists Hispanic or Latino and indicates race as white, then that person is considered minority or not minority?
Right. So if somebody checks Hispanic or Latino and checks that they're white under race, then that person would be considered minority. The only respondents that would be considered not minority are those that check only white under race and check not Hispanic or Latino under ethnicity. And again, those are categories that were given to us. So it's not a perfect system, but that's how the definitions work.
Great, thank you. So Diane Serrata has asked a similar question about counting of individual professionals trained. This is similar to what was asked about the persons with dementia and caregivers. If one professional attends more than one training, is the professional counted one time as an unduplicated count or each time as a duplicated count?
same answer. Everybody's no duplications, and the time is recorded in the direct service hours because the training counts as direct service.
So the person would be counted on this page once, the professional, but where you would get additional credit, so to speak, would be in the total direct service units delivered. So if a person,
and then I would also add to that you know, you would be able to, in a comprehensive narrative in your semi-annual report, you would outline that kind of, you know, that people, you could put the additional information that was pertinent in your narrative report.
Great, thanks, Erin. And we have a few more minutes for questions if anyone has any additional questions that they'd like to add in the chat pod here. Erin, do you have any other comments that you'd like to add before we close out?
No, I just would like to thank everybody for making the time today. I hope you learned some. We'll certainly all be in learning mode for the next few months. We're super excited to get started, and as Sari noted before, and as you see on the slide, if you have pressing questions before you get engaged with your TA liaison, please don't hesitate to contact us, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for your questions, and we'll be in touch. Have a great afternoon.